Hi everyone, I'm Joe. Today it's time for me to do my February 2022 reading wrap up. February was a really good reading month. I read 9 books in total by 9 different authors in 3 genres, and the 3 genres are, especially 2 of them, are predictable for me: science fiction and fantasy, mostly fantasy to be honest, with a little bit of horror as well. And without further delay, I'll get straight into talking about the first of the 9 books, which was The Missing Page, which is an ebook, so a picture will come up on screen, by Sebastian. This is the second book in the Page and Summer series. I read the first book, I believe it was last year. It could have been the year before, but I think it was like the start of last year. And I really enjoyed that book. I read that book, got really into it, due to a friend of mine, Rachel. Basically her enthusiasm for the book, as with all books, got me very interested in this one, in the first book, which I read and greatly enjoyed, and frankly I have been quite looking forward to this second book, and I hope there's more because it's a really fun set of characters and setting. The idea for it is it's a sort of basically it's a murder mystery series of sorts, with 2 main male characters, and yes, there is a mild male-male romance, that might appeal to some people, it might put some people off. To me, I'm neutral on it, I'm not bothered by romance in books, but I actively look for romances, just happens to have one in the book. The 2 main male characters, one of them is a doctor, the other works for the government in the role of what is basically a spy. He never exactly tells each other what he does, but that's sort of what he does. And basically there is a series of, sort of in the traditional vein of these things, a murder that's quite close to one of the characters, and they have to solve it. In this case, however, there actually isn't, and it's strange, it's only the second book, but it's a murder mystery series. Well, of course, it doesn't actually have a murder. It's more about a death in the family of the one character, and basically he goes there for the reading of the will and to uncover a bit of, not that suspicious, but possibly suspicious, he's not entirely sure, sort of family history. And obviously his friend joins him, and eventually, and they are basically trying to uncover the family history and what went on with this certain family member dying. And I'm not going to say too much about it, because it's actually, I didn't know too much about it, and I enjoyed going into it relatively blind. But let's just say the 2 main characters are really, really interesting characters. They are developed well, they work well together. You can tell that they actually genuinely like each other, and they just work together well. They just like, they're a couple, and they like being around each other and like spending time around each other, which is really nice seeing around in any sort of book, frankly, when 2 characters like each other and genuinely really like spending time one another, just doing the little things on a day-to-day basis. It's nice to see. The setting is good, and overall I would heavily recommend this book. The second book that I read in February was The Chrysalids, written by John Wyndham. This is a fairly short one. This is the second John Wyndham book I read. I only read the first one only a matter of months ago, and I will be definitely reading more as and when I can get hold of them. This is an interesting one, and the cover, I should say, picture, has an indication of what the book may be about, because if you've noticed, there's an extra finger. So this is a hand with 5 fingers and a thumb. Yeah, that's not entirely normal. So let's just say the book is a science fiction book set in the semi-near or distant future. You're never entirely sure. There's obviously been some kind of catastrophic World War III possibly type event. You're never entirely told, but it's, you are referenced to, the big advanced world that we had. Things are falling apart, and blatantly nuclear radiation, you pretty much get the impression, can occasionally mutate people in different ways. And this is about essentially a set of characters who are indeed, as you would expect, mutated, they don't fit into society because society is very rigid and they don't allow anybody to be different. Then you must be pure, and it's very intolerant. It was a hard start for me to read this book because there was a character at the start of this book that I didn't like, and I was hoping that somebody would basically kill them. I mean, I'm not going to mince words. You know, I actively wanted the characters to die because they were just so unpleasant and intolerant that I just hated reading about it, and it was hard going continuing reading the book because of it. But after a bit, the focus is still, you know, has that character in mind, but he's the antagonist of the book. The protagonist set of characters, they are well written, interesting, and the plot line, which shows them basically trying to gain some semblance of independence and normality in a world that isn't normal, is an interesting one. And I really like this because it's a little bit of an adventure as well at one point, which I think is interesting. I'm not going to say how, but I was actually quite impressed by this, and I would recommend it if you want something to read by Wyndham. It's a fairly short novel as well and fairly easy to get into. Yes, that annoying character start wasn't the easiest, but you know, it is what it is sometimes. And the third book I read in the month was a group read, and that is The Book of Dragons, edited by Jonathan Strahan with multiple authors within it. This is a multi-author collection and one that I really, really enjoyed. This I group read with Rite and quite a few other people. Rite, known as the Bookfinch on BookTube, is a Finnish booktuber, a friend of mine and a really nice person who created a reading group on Goodreads, and this is one of the books of it. And indeed I actually did join her for a live show where the two of us discussed this, and in a fair bit of detail really, about 3 weeks ago now I think it was, which I greatly enjoyed. So, you know, hopefully I can join her for more books as and when they occur. And I really enjoyed this because this is just short stories featuring dragons of some sort. Some of them they use dragons as a metaphor. Some of them they use dragons as literal dragons, you know, with the traditional, although little bit alternative idea of, you know, the sort of dragon and a knight trying to kill the dragon in one case. Some of the dragons are science fiction related. You have a steampunk dragon in one of them, although I was a bit disappointed that the steampunk dragon was actually not the focus, which is a shame. And it's just that collection of short stories with interesting themes, ideas. Overall the collection worked well. Of course, with a collection like this, there's a few short stories that was like, really? And I wasn't impressed by in the slightest. But mostly they did work fairly well, and a few reasonable ones. So, you know, so you got the full range of whatever, reasonable and very, very good. So, you know, overall a good collection. Because I think any collection that can have good books and, you know, good stories, I should say, and bad in it with mediocre is good overall, really. You know, as long as it doesn't have too many terrible stories that I didn't like, it will work out, and this frankly did, and I would recommend this overall. The next book that I read was another very narrow thin book, I should say, and that is Outside the Gates, written by Molly Glass. I tried reading this and did read and enjoyed it due to Rachel, known as Caliardi on BookTube. She spoke about the author Molly Glass quite a few times, and I've been wanting to read something by her for about a good 2 years now, and I finally have. This is a very thin book, so it'll be very easy to pick up. This won various awards. I believe it won Hugo Nebulas, or at least short story ones. I'm not entirely sure on that. It didn't say on the back of the book, unfortunately, but I know it did win awards like that, so it's a very well-known book within science fiction fantasy. And this is an interesting story. It's basically a young boy who lives in this community where the world has sort of collapsed, and this is basically a gated community, well, a walled community, technically, actually not gated, walled, and they live there apparently really quite happily, apart from if you do certain things wrong, and you basically are outcast. This boy does something wrong. He's basically pushed outside the gate, hence the title, outside the gates of the city. And outside the gates is thought of as a wilderness and a horrible place to be, because there's weird mutants and horrible monsters, and generally you thought of if you're banished outside, you might live, but it's not going to be a very happy life. And frankly, you probably won't live because you'd be killed or eaten by people, cannibals, monsters, wherever. People in the city don't care. They're just, they're okay. So it's their big threat and deterrent. And the boy goes outside and he has to learn to overcome what he finds out there. I don't want to say much more than that because he is very short, but I was surprised by the level of detail and the level of character development in this, because it's very short. It is, was it 100 pages? Nope, it's not even 100 pages. So, considering it's less than 100 pages, the character development was actually quite high, world development was high, and I was actually impressed by this. The ideas in it were clever, so I like this and I would recommend it overall, and I would definitely want to, I will read it again at some future point. The next book that I read was Rite of Passage, written by Alexei Panshin. This is a really interesting fantasy novel which I greatly enjoyed. This was actually a Christmas present from somebody that I know, an actual author who is related to a booktube friend of mine, and Kelsey. It's actually her aunt who happens to be an author, and this is a book that inspired her to try her hand at writing years ago, and as a child, and basically so she sent it me because I reviewed her book, and indeed she actually sent me a copy of her book that now includes part of my review in it. So actually my name's in a book, which is interesting by itself and rather surprising. This book is an interesting one, and you can tell how this affected her with writing, because by the way, this won the Nebula Award in 1968 or 69, depending on which year this qualified for. And it's an interesting and well-written novel. Basically, the idea is this is a far future human society. This part of society is living on basically a very large colony ship orbiting above a planet. The ship is almost self-sufficient, but not quite. There are humans living on the planet below them, but there's an issue between them, because basically the ones on the ship, they think they are kind of like the more evolved humans, so to speak. They are like more intelligent, they know the technology, but they can't manage by themselves, because of course this is a orbiting spaceship, so they need fuel and certain things that obviously you can't just produce them. You've got to get them off of some sort of planet or asteroid or whatever else, so they have to trade with the planet, and this is essentially the way they interact with the planet. And it's basically a test of not courage, it's just a sort of adult rights, as the title may suggest, rite of passage, because this is a society where to be accepted as an adult of sorts, you've got to do this sort of test where you go on one of the planets and survive, and it's quite harsh, and to me it seems really impractical, but still, and it's an interesting setup. The characters are well developed, and this society and the interaction between the society on the colony ship and the society on the planet, which are both obviously from the colony ship originally, therefore from blatantly meant to be Earth, is interesting, because you've got these two different sort of ideas on how to live and what it means to be, humanity, to be a people, to be a society, and they don't exactly see eye to eye, blatantly. So it's interesting views on humanity and society, and one that I really did enjoy overall, and I would recommend this. I mean, it doesn't feel like it was written in the 60s necessarily. It doesn't feel, sometimes with older science fiction and fantasy books, you can feel the decades when they were written. This, not really. This could have been written, within the last decade, so, which personally I think is quite impressive. The next book that I read is an ebook, so I'll put a picture up on screen now. And that is We Have Always Lived in the Castle, written by Shirley Jackson. This is a very creepy horror novel, which frankly didn't work for me at all. Now, this is a well-known novel. Obviously, We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. It's known for winning various awards. I'm surprised it did on a personal level, because it failed for me pretty spectacularly. Actually, I was bored by it and thought there's nothing exciting about this book. It was just it's just a curious environment, and then the book ended. This was a group read, by the way, as well, that I read with some friends. So it was interesting for their thoughts, but not on a personal level. The idea of it is simply that there is a family, is it Blackstone? I forgot the family name. Something like Blackstone. They live in this basically sort of manor house. It's not a castle, it's a manor house, and it's a gated and walled manor house. They keep themselves very isolated because years before, the one daughter of the family who still lives there, she basically, for some reason, decided to poison and kill most of her family, as you do. And now there's her sister, and unless I'm mistaken, I believe it is her granddad, unless it's her uncle. I think it's a granddad though. I forgot the actual family connection now. Living in this house, and it's basically the way they interact with the town around them, which obviously the town think they are very strange and weird. They think the town is strange and weird, so it's very isolated. And basically the catalyst is their cousin, whom I do not like, and I was hoping he would be killed, frankly. I'm not going to mince words. He comes to visit and ends up virtually moving in, and he's not a nice person at all. And let's just say this triggers a lot of events off, not generally very positive ones as well. And it's all about the journey of and the development of these two sisters in particular. To me, that's how I think of this book. It's their strange isolation together, stuck in this house. It's a self-inflicted isolation, though they could go out, but they just don't. I don't get the purpose of this. It's got a slightly strange, creepy atmosphere, but apart from that, it's just them living in this house with a strange environment around them, the way they interact with the town. It was interesting, but didn't do anything very exciting for me. And frankly, I mean, almost everybody else that read this book, it's a group read, I read it, they greatly enjoyed it. For me, it just felt too straightforward. It was like, yes, you got the characters, they're doing these things, and then what? I wanted complexity. I needed more to happen, or at least more development in interesting ways, and there just wasn't. It was just on pure atmosphere. A book that relies on only atmosphere doesn't always work for me, and this didn't, sadly. But I'm not going to I'm not going to say I would recommend reading it. If you like atmosphere in books, like really heavy atmosphere, it's a good one to read. It just didn't work for me on a personal level. The next book also relies on a very interesting atmosphere, and that is The Fog, written by James Herbert. There is a James Herbert and a Frank Herbert. Obviously Frank Herbert of Dune fame. I always tend to say the wrong names. And this is an interesting one, and this was a Christmas present from my big sister as well. But basically, one day there's a strange sort of what seems to be an earthquake or something happens in this small sort of sleepy English town. The big crack appears in the earth, and all this evil fog apparently starts coming out, and it starts sending people mad and starts making them kill each other and kill themselves in horrible ways. So is this, you know, the work of, you know, the devil, you know, Satan? Is this like, you know, a demonic satanic fog coming out of the earth? Is it a natural phenomenon? Is it, well, what? That's what you're never sure of. Well, for a while anyway. You do get answers actually, fairly, and it's an interesting scenario because the main character literally ends up nearly falling into this big sort of chasm in the earth when the earthquake first hits, and he manages to survive barely, and it's his sort of interaction with the other characters and him trying to work out what this fog is, how it can be avoided because it's causing a massive damage in around the area. And yeah, let's just say it goes from there in an interesting way that I didn't necessarily expect, but I greatly enjoyed, and I really did enjoy this because unlike obviously We Have Always Lived in the Castle, this relies on heavily atmosphere, but it's also got a wider range of characters who have got a slightly more, to me, involved development, interact with each other in an interesting way. And I mean, yes, it's got some dark moments, but it certainly has some moments that are almost comedic, even though people do die in the book. But sometimes there are moments that are almost comedic with how they do these things. It's so overblown that it's almost, I mean, even the deaths are, some of the deaths are so sort of ridiculously gruesome in a way that they're actually kind of funny, because it's like, really, it's a bit overdone, but actually it's great because of that. And I like, it's one of the things, it's almost like a B-movie horror in some ways, you know, where you got the death, it's gruesome, but it's so overdone, but you can tell, but the enthusiasm is there, and it works because of that. This book worked for me well. I really did enjoy this. I mean, I do like James Herbert mostly. I mean, so far I've read about 6 or 7 of his books at least, and all but one I've actually greatly enjoyed. So, you know, overall he's a good author for me. And the penultimate book that I read in February was Making Money, written by Terry Pratchett. This is one of the Discord Library Collector's Editions. It has a figure of the main character, Moist Von Lipwig, on the cover, wearing a hat and a jacket. And this is one of Terry Pratchett's Discworld books. There are 41 of them in the official numbered series overall. They are fantasy. The Discworld is a very strange concept of a large round disc world, obviously, which rests on the back of 4 very large elephants, which stand on the back of a very large turtle. You know, it sounds crazy, and it is, but it's also brilliant and a work of genius, and it's also really funny. And I just love these books, and I was really impressed by this one as well. The character of Moist is only in 3 Discworld books overall. The fairly late ones, I've only first came across him recently. This is the second one. In this one, basically, Moist is a former conman, and indeed would still like to be a conman if he can actually get away with it. He's basically given a choice, although that's not much of a choice, between either being executed or taking on a role that the patrician of the city, you know, the ruler of the city, and Morkborg wants him to do. And that is, in this book, he wants to take on the role of the reviving the Ankh-Morpork banking system. So putting a massive, you know, sort of criminal, you know, especially a sort of one that does, you know, confidence sort of tricks and that sort of thing, in charge of a banking system. Interesting. Veterinary, though, doesn't do anything for no reason, and let's just say the character of Moist in this book is really interesting, really well developed, and even though this is only the second book by him that I've read, I've come to really like this character, and indeed all the other characters that sort of interact with him. and it's just nice to see the world being more developed. This is one of the novels that are classed as the industrial novels, because at this point the Discworld novels are being developed in a more modern sense in a way, because you have almost technology in them but not quite. You have fantasy equivalents of current technology, which is really fun by itself. And I mean, I'm going to do a review about this, so I'm not going to say more now in a few months' time. So once because I'm a bit behind on Discworld reviews, so I will review it. But I loved it, and I would recommend this for Discworld fans, frankly. Don't start off with that one though, because it would be strange, frankly. Then the final book that I read was The Weed That Strings the Hangman's Bag, written by Alan Bradley. This is the second book in the Flavia Duluth murder mystery series, or sort of mystery series anyway, unless it's always murder. And it is a really nice, interesting book with brilliant characters, great plotting, and it just keeps you wanting to read. I mean, I've read this almost non-stop. I literally had one break to get food and a drink in the middle of this. Otherwise, I've read this book in one go. Other than that, so which I don't do that often actually. And I really like this book, obviously due to that hint. Now, the idea of it is based around the character of Flavia Duluth, who is a very young girl. She's 12, unless I'm mistaken, or is she 11? Around then, anyway. Sort of just about to be technically a child, but she's nearly becoming a teenager. She lives in this big house with her two older sisters, who she obviously argues with and has issues with, as families often do. And her father, her mother, died sadly due to illness some years previously, when she was very young. And basically a series of, all the books are like this. There's a murder or death in the general area of where the family lives, and Flavia gets involved because her particular interest is a little bit unusual, especially considering her age, is chemistry. Basically, she likes, she's got her own chemistry lab in this old house that a former member of her family built many years previously, and now she's basically commandeered this laboratory. Her dad doesn't mind, he keeps it out of the way, and she's there doing her experiments in this lab. And obviously the way she's solving the crime is by taking samples of things, testing them, and as far as the people in the book goes, it's generally been a bit of a nuisance to people and getting in the way, although she's actually highly intelligent and does actively help, unsurprisingly. And I'm not going to say the plot line of this one, but that's the idea of all the books as far as I'm aware. And they're just, even though this is only the second, I do own the third and the fourth, and I will definitely be buying more because I just like the character of Flavia and the way she interacts with people. She knows how people think of her. She's a young girl who's probably smarter than some of the people around her. She's aware of this. She tries not to show it too much, but it's hard not to. So she knows that she's a bit of a odd character in a way, and a bit of a sort of outcast in her own way because of what she's like in her own sort of intelligence and skill sets. So her interactions with people is interesting. She's riding around the town and the countryside on her faithful bike as well, which is funny to read about when she keeps several times her bike gets taken away, so she's there getting all concerned by a bike, which is amusing by itself. And this is just a brilliant series and a brilliant book, and one that I'm definitely going to be continuing with, and I would heavily recommend this series because it's just well written, very well plotted, it's nuanced, intricate, cleverly written. It's not always what you think it's going to be. Some murder mysteries that I've read, are predictable. This isn't, because the character's a little bit different, being a 12-year-old, chemistry person. It's alternative. As a result, the plot line's alternative and a little bit different, and I really enjoyed it for that, amongst many other reasons. And with that said, that is actually it for all of the books that I have read in February. If you have read any of these, or you would like to, then please leave a comment and we can talk about them. Or obviously if you want to know more information about any of them, then, you know, feel free. If you only have any suggestions based on books you think I might like due to these, then again leave a comment. I'm always interested in new authors, new books, new genres, you know, whatever the case may be. And that is it. So all the links to these books will be found in the description box below, along with all my social media links and to the several people that I mentioned. And with that, that is it for this video. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you another day. Bye for now.